The house wasn't a purchase of passion, it was a transaction of practicality, a lifeline. After the spectacular implosion of my decade-long career in marketing, a casualty of a corporate merger that valued buzzwords over people, I was adrift, my savings were a dwindling hourglass, and my tiny city apartment felt less like a home and more like a tastefully decorated prison cell. Then came the letter from a lawyer in a town I'd never heard of, Briarwood Creek. It informed me that my great-aunt, Lillian Ainsworth, a woman I only knew from a single sepia-toned photograph in my mother's old album, had passed away, and she had left me everything. Everything, as it turned out, was a single, hulking Victorian house on the edge of town, and not much else. My mother, when I called her, was quiet. Lillian was private, she'd said, her voice distant. She never married, just stayed in that house. We lost touch. The inheritance felt less like a windfall and more like a burden, a problem to be solved. My plan was simple, clinical even: drive to Briarwood Creek, clear out the house, hire the cheapest contractor I could find to slap some paint on it, and sell it. Use the money to reset my life. A clean slate, bought and paid for by a dead relative I never knew. The first time I saw it, the house seemed to sigh. It was a 3-story relic, a grand old dame sagging under the weight of time and neglect. The paint, once a cheerful buttercup yellow, was now a peeling, jaundiced mess. The gingerbread trim was chipped, and one of the shutters on the second floor hung from a single hinge, like a broken wing. It was flanked by ancient oak trees whose branches scraped against the roof, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. This place needs more than paint, I thought, a wave of exhaustion washing over me before I'd even stepped inside. The key the lawyer gave me was heavy and ornate, a piece of skeletonized iron that felt like it belonged in a Gothic novel. It turned in the lock with a groan of protest, and the heavy oak door swung inward, releasing a breath of trapped time. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust, dried lavender, and something else, something faintly metallic and sad. The interior was a time capsule, furniture huddled under white dust cloths like a congregation of ghosts. Sunlight struggled through grimy window panes, illuminating dancing dust motes and thick, hazy columns. A grandfather clock stood silent in the hallway, its pendulum stilled, its hands frozen at 3:30. It was clear Lillian had been living in only a few rooms. The rest of the house was a museum of disuse. My first week was a blur of dust masks, trash bags, and a growing sense of archaeological dread. Every drawer I opened, every closet I peered into, was a fresh wave of Lillian's life. Faded floral dresses that smelled of cedar, stacks of books on botany and local bird species, tins of loose-leaf tea. It was the quiet, orderly life of a woman who found her companionship in things that grew and things that were written. There was nothing personal, no photographs, no letters, no diaries. It was as if she had systematically erased the intimate contours of her existence, leaving only the broad, impersonal strokes. It felt deliberate. The cold, practical part of me didn't care less to sort through, it reasoned. But another part of me, a smaller, more curious part that I had suppressed for years, felt a prickle of unease. It felt like a puzzle with all the edge pieces missing. I hired a local man named George, a semi-retired contractor with kind eyes and hands as gnarled as the oak branches outside. He walked through the house with me, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. He'd tap on walls, shine a flashlight into dark corners, and make soft, whistling sounds through his teeth. Got good bones, he declared, standing in the center of the living room. Plaster and lath, though a real mess to take down. You sure you want to go that far? Could just paint over the wallpaper. He pointed to the wall, where faded cabbage roses climbed towards the ceiling. I shook my head. The thought of simply covering up the layers of the past felt wrong, dishonest, somehow. Besides, the wallpaper was bubbling in places, stained with decades of damp. No, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I want to take it back to the studs. All of it. I want to see what's underneath. George just nodded slowly. Your house, your rules. But walls like these, they've been standing a long time. They hold memories. He said it with a wry smile, but his eyes held a different, more serious light. Sometimes they hold secrets too. I laughed it off, a brittle, citified sound in the quiet house. Well, I'm not afraid of a little dust and a few family secrets. Famous last words, I'd later think. The absolute height of foolish, arrogant pride, The renovation began with demolition. George and his small crew started on the top floor. And I decided to tackle the main floor living room myself. It felt good. The raw physical labor. It was a way to sweat out my frustration, my grief over a life I thought I'd had all figured out. I put on a mask and goggles, took a crowbar in hand, and faced the wall of faded roses. The first layer was the wallpaper, which peeled off in satisfyingly long strips, revealing an older, geometric pattern underneath. Below that, a layer of pale blue paint. Then, finally, the plaster and lath. Prying the plaster off was brutal, messy work. It crumbled into a fine, choking powder that coated everything underneath. The skeleton of the house was exposed, the vertical studs, the horizontal crossbeams, the raw, naked wood. It was behind the fireplace, on the main chimney breast, that I found the first one. I was using a hammer to knock loose a stubborn section of plaster when I heard a sound that wasn't right. Not the solid thud of hammer on plaster and brick, but a hollow thump. I stopped, my heart giving a little flutter. I knocked again, gently this time, with my knuckles. Thump, thump, thump. It was hollow, my breath caught. George's words echoed in my mind. They hold secrets too. With a surge of adrenaline, I pried at the edges of the hollow-sounding area. The plaster gave way, and then I saw it. One of the bricks in the chimney wasn't mortared in place. It was loose. My fingers, clumsy in my work gloves, fumbled with it. It slid out of its cavity with a gritty scrape. And there, in the dark, soot-stained space behind it, was a small, metal box. It wasn't a treasure chest. It was a simple tin box, the kind that might have once held biscuits or tea. It was rusted at the edges, but otherwise intact. I reached into the darkness, my fingers closing around the cold metal. It was heavier than it looked. I pulled it out into the light, my hands shaking slightly. Dust and soot rained down, and I wiped the lid with the back of my glove. There was no lock. With trembling anticipation, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton wool, was a leather-bound book, a diary. It was small, bound in dark green leather that was cracked with age. A thin, silk ribbon, now faded to a pale ghost of its former emerald, was tucked between the pages. I lifted it out. It felt impossibly fragile in my hands. There was no name, no inscription on the cover. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, a looping cursive script in faded brown ink. October 12, 1928. The house is finally quiet. The workmen have gone for the day, and the scent of fresh-cut wood and paint hangs in the air. It is a proud scent, a scent of new beginnings. I pray it will be so. Father says this house is a fortress, a fine and sturdy home for a new bride. But even as I write this, sitting in the window seat of my new bedroom, I see the long shadows the oak trees cast upon the lawn. They look like grasping fingers. It is a silly thought, I know. A bride should not have such grim fancies. But I am not yet a bride, and the fancies are my own. I sank down onto the dusty floor, my crowbar forgotten beside me. I leaned against the exposed studs of the house, the rough wood pressing into my back. This had to be Lillian's, my great-aunt, a young woman on the cusp of marriage in this very house. Almost a century ago, a fortress, she had called it. The word sent a chill through me. I kept reading, the sun beginning to set. Outside, casting the room in hues of orange and deep purple, the early entries were what you might expect. Descriptions of arranging furniture, of planting a rose garden, of the small triumphs and tribulations of making a new home. She wrote about her fiancé, a man named Alastair. He was, in her words, a man of great charisma and ambition. He was a businessman, involved in timber and land development. He was charming, she wrote. He brought her gifts. He told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. November 4, 1928. Alastair visited today. He said my new dress was lovely, but that the color blue did not do justice to my eyes. He prefers me in green. He has such a definitive eye for beauty. He also suggested I move the piano away from the east wall. He says the morning sun will fade the wood. He is always thinking, always noticing the smallest details. It is a comfort to be so thoroughly cared for. But as I read on, deep into the winter of 1928, a subtle shift began, a dissonant chord in the melody of her new life. The descriptions of Alastair's care started to feel different. The details he noticed were no longer just about the piano or the color of her dress. January 16, 1929. I had tea with Mrs. Gable from town today. A lovely woman, though she talks a great deal. When Alistair came home, he seemed displeased. He asked me what we spoke of. I told him it was nothing of consequence, recipes and local gossip. He smiled. But it did not reach his eyes. He said, "Lillian, my darling, there are many people in this town who do not have our best interests at heart. Their gossip is poison. It is better to remain apart from it. Your world is here with me, safe. I suppose he is right. Why should I need the company of others when I have him?" The word safe was underlined twice. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a love story. This was something else. I spent the next few days in a daze. George and his crew worked upstairs, their hammers and saws, a distant, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart as I devoured the diary. I told George I wanted to handle the demolition in the rest of the main floor myself. He just gave me a knowing look and said, "Take your time. No rush." Every wall I opened, I did so with a sense of breathless dread and anticipation. Was this where she'd hidden the next piece? The diary became my blueprint, my guide to the anatomy of the house's secrets. Lillian's entries grew more sporadic and fearful. Alistair's care was escalating into control. He discouraged visitors. He questioned her every expenditure. He began to criticize her friends, her hobbies, even the books she read. March 22, 1929. I bought a new book of poetry today. When Alistair saw it, he picked it up and, "Read the cover." "Nonsense," he said, his voice flat. "Sentimental foolishness for lonely women." He dropped it on the table. "You are not lonely, Lillian. You have me." Later, I could not find the book. When I asked him, he said he couldn't recall where it had gone. He said, "I am becoming terribly forgetful." Forgetful, the word appeared again and again. He was isolating her, not just from the world, but from her own mind. He was gaslighting her, a century before the term was even coined, in a burst of frantic energy. I attacked the wall in the pantry. In the diary, Lillian had mentioned a loose floorboard where she kept a little money, just in case. April 9, 1929. He has taken my purse. He says he will manage all the household finances from now on. To lessen my burdens, I feel as if the walls are shrinking. This house, my fortress, is becoming my prison. I managed to hide a few dollars under the loose board in the pantry, just enough for a train ticket. The thought is both terrifying and thrilling. To where would I even go? I found the floorboard. It took me an hour of tapping and pulling, but it finally came up. The small space beneath was empty, filled only with dust and the husks of dead spiders. Of course it was empty. He would have found it. The feeling of violation was so intense. It was as if it were my own. I was no longer just a renovator. I was an avenger. I was Lillian's witness, her confidant across the chasm of time. Her fear was a living thing, seeping from the pages and into the very air of the house. I started sleeping on a mattress on the floor in the living room, the diary beside me. I was too afraid to be upstairs, too afraid to be far from the heart of the house where her story was entombed. The next discovery came from an entry about a fight. May 1, 1929. We had a terrible argument. I told him I felt suffocated. I told him I wanted to visit my sister in the city. His face became like stone. He did not shout. That is not his way. He spoke in a low, cold voice that cut me deeper than any yell. He told me I was ungrateful, hysterical. He said my mind was unwell. He backed me against the wall in the study, the one with the built-in bookshelves. He grabbed my arm, his fingers like iron bands. I cried out, and in the struggle, one of my mother's pearl earrings was lost. It flew from my ear and I heard it skitter across the floor. Later, after he had gone, I searched for it for hours. It was gone. Another piece of my life, of my past, swallowed by this house. The study, it was a dark, wood-paneled room that I had been dreading clearing out. It felt oppressive, heavy with the ghost of Alistair's cruelty. Now I entered it with a renewed purpose. I ran my hands along the base of the ornate, built-in bookshelves. I pulled up the edges of the ancient, threadbare rug. Nothing. I was about to give up when I remembered her words. I heard it skitter across the floor. I got down on my hands and knees, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. And there, lodged deep in the thin gap between the baseboard and the floorboards, was something small and white. My fingers were too big to get it. I had to go to my toolbox and get a pair of needle-nosed pliers. Carefully, with the precision of a surgeon, I reached into the gap and pulled. Out came a single, perfect pearl earring, tarnished with age, a small silver hook still attached. I held it in the palm of my hand. It was real. It was all real. This small pearl was the proof, a tangible link to her pain. I closed my hand around it, the pearl cool against my skin, and for the first time, I cried. I cried for Lillian, for the fear she must have felt, for the life that was stolen from her. Piece by piece, the final entries in the diary were frantic, the elegant script dissolving into a desperate scrawl. May 20th, 1929. He is involved in something terrible. I found papers in his desk, land deeds, signatures that look forged, names of men I know from town. Men who have recently fallen on hard times, their farms failing. Alistair is buying their land for pennies, but the papers, it looks as if he is forging documents to take it from them. This is his ambition. It is not charisma. It is a rot, a sickness. I know he would kill to protect this. What do I do? Who would believe me? The hysterical wife with the unwell mind. May 25th, 1929. I have gathered what I can. The forged deeds, a letter he wrote to his lawyer that hints at his schemes. I cannot keep them on me. He sometimes searches my things. I have to hide them, somewhere he would never think to look, somewhere he despises. My foolish, sentimental things, he called my hope chest. A coffin for daydreams once, he would never look there, not in a million years. It is in the attic, under the eaves, I will put them there, God help me. That was the last entry. The rest of the pages were blank. The attic. I had avoided it. It was a dark, gaping mouth at the top of the house now. I pulled down the rickety folding stairs, a shower of dust and insulation falling on me. Armed with a powerful flashlight, I ascended into the oppressive heat and darkness. The air was thick and still. The space was a graveyard of forgotten things, broken chairs, picture frames with the pictures torn out, and there under, the sloping eaves in the far corner, was a large cedar hope chest. It was covered in a thick blanket of dust, undisturbed for what must have been decades. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't locked, the latch was stiff. But it gave way with a screech of protest. I lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar filled the air. Inside were the things a young woman would save. A pressed flower, a dance card, a baby's bonnet. And underneath it all, at the very bottom, was a false bottom, a thin piece of cedar that I was only able to pry up with the edge of my crowbar. And there they were. A small stack of papers, tied with a faded ribbon, land deeds, with shaky, mismatched signatures, a letter, written in Alistair's bold, arrogant hand, outlining a plan to ruin a rival farmer by diverting a water source. It was everything she said it would be, the proof of his crimes. The source of her terror. She hadn't been imagining it. She wasn't hysterical. She was a victim, and she had been fighting back the only way she knew how. But where was Lillian? What happened after that last diary entry? The town's historical records, which I had briefly looked at online, said she had disappeared, simply vanished. Alistair had apparently told everyone she had run off, that her mind was unstable. He played the part of the grieving, abandoned fiancé perfectly. He sold the house a few years later and left town a wealthy man. No one ever questioned it. They just accepted the story of the crazy, unstable woman. As I sat there, in the sweltering heat of the attic, holding the evidence of her sanity and his guilt, a storm broke outside. The wind howled, rattling the windows. Rain began to lash against the roof, a deafening roar just inches above my head. And then, the power went out. The attic was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. My flashlight, which I had set on the floor, flickered and died. The batteries were dead. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I was alone in the dark, at the top of a house full of sorrow, with a storm raging around me, and in that moment, I felt it. I felt her fear. It was a primal terror. The feeling of being trapped, of being hunted. Every creak of the house, every groan of the wind, was Alistair's footstep on the stair. Every scrape of a branch against the roof was his hand on the doorknob. My breath hitched in my throat. I was no longer Alara. I was Lillian, cowering in the dark, praying he would not find me. I scrambled backwards, away from the hope chest, my hands hitting something hard. A loose floorboard. My logical mind screamed at me, it's just the storm, it's an old house. But the fear was older, deeper. My fingers fumbled in the blackness, feeling the edges of the board. I pulled at it. It came loose. My hand dipped into the space below, and my fingers brushed against something. Not paper, something small and hard. I didn't know what it was until I had scrambled down the attic stairs, back into the gray twilight of the second floor, and held it up to the faint light of a window. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished, almost black with age. I pried it open with my thumbnail. On one side, a tiny, faded picture of a woman I recognized as a younger version of my own grandmother, Lillian's sister. And on the other side, not a picture, but a tiny, folded piece of paper. I carefully unfolded it. In shaky, barely legible script were 2 words: he knows, the final secret, the final desperate warning. He had found out about the papers. He knew she had the proof. And then nothing. Her story just stopped because he had stopped it. He hadn't just stolen her life. He had stolen her death, burying her memory under lies. The storm ended as dawn broke. The sunlight that streamed through the windows felt different, cleansing. I sat in the dusty living room, the diary, the earring, the papers, and the locket laid out before me on the floor. I had done it. I had excavated her truth. The secrets were no longer in the walls. They were here in the light. The renovation continued, but with a new purpose. I didn't sell the house. How could I? It was our house now. Mine and Lillian's. I took the papers to the State Historical Society. Alistair's name, I discovered, was on several prominent buildings in a city a few hours away, a pioneer of industry. My evidence opened an inquiry. His legacy was rewritten, his name tarnished with the truth he had tried to bury. It was too late for legal justice, but it wasn't too late for historical justice. Every choice I made in the renovation was a tribute to her. I chose wallpaper with a pattern of wild, free-growing roses. I insisted George help me install a beautiful, wide window seat in the bedroom, a place for fancies, grim or otherwise. The house, once a place of fear and confinement for her, slowly transformed into a space of light and openness. The fortress became a sanctuary. I kept the pearl earring and the locket in a small box on my new mantelpiece. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, when the only sound is the gentle ticking of the restored grandfather clock, I hold them in my hand. I didn't just renovate a house. I renovated a life. I gave a voice to a woman who had been silenced, and in doing so, I found my own. The secrets were in the walls. It was true, but now so was the truth, and the truth, I've learned, is the only thing that can ever truly set you free.